Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Stacey, and welcome to How Did We Get Here, where we look at some of the craziest cases throughout history and ask ourselves, how did we get here? Today, we have a much more lighthearted story than our last episode, just in terms of the fact that no one gets hurt, it's a happy ending, and it's also very interesting to look back on. So if you're not a reader and don't know who she is, Agatha Christie is one of the best-selling authors of all time and is basically known as the Queen of Mysteries. Her whole genre was that mystery whodunit vibe, and definitely, I don't want to say paved the way, but was definitely one of the more prominent people in this category. Today we'll actually be talking about her 11-day disappearance. I'm not going to do an intro to this, we're just going to jump straight in. So Agatha was born Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller, and she was born on September 15th, 1890 in Devon, England. She was the youngest daughter of Frederick and Clarissa Miller and was homeschooled all her life. Her mother actually didn't want her to learn how to read, but at the age of 5, Agatha decided she was going to teach herself. Fast forward to 1912, when she met Archibald Christie, who we're going to be referring to as Archie, who was an aviator during World War I, which is what kept them from getting together. So Agatha's mother actually disapproved of them being together because she had a feeling that Archie wouldn't be faithful. Fast forward to December 24th, 1914, and Archie and Agatha got married while he was on leave. So now Agatha had always been a writer. As we know, she taught herself how to read and write, and she had always been writing short stories on her own free time. One day, her sister dares her that she couldn't write a good mystery book, and that is when Agatha wrote her debut novel, The Mysterious Affairs at Styles. After 6 rejections for this book, it was bought by John Lane, and he actually gave her a contract for 5 other books. And this is where her iconic character, Hercule Poirot, came from. So Agatha saw a very quick rise to stardom. Everything was going well, and on August 5th of 1919, she gave birth to her only child, her daughter Rosalind. So everything was going well for Agatha until on February 1st, 1926, her mother, who she was very close to, died. This brought on a case of writer's block for Agatha. This is when she was writing The Mystery of the Blue Train, and she kind of just stopped midway. While all this is happening, she then finds out that Archie is having an affair with Nancy Neal. So Agatha is in a very distressed state of mind. On December 3rd, 1926, at 9 p.m., Agatha puts her now 7-year-old daughter to bed, grabs an attaché case, and leaves her house without saying a word to anybody. Next day, her car is found hanging over a steep slope at the Newlands Corner near Guildford, and it had seemed that it was run off the road and stopped at the edge of the cliff before ever going over. However, what they found inside of the car was the attaché case, a fur coat, and Agatha's driver's license, but there was no driver to be found. So immediately this becomes headline news. No one knows where Agatha is, and the Queen of Mysteries has now become a mystery herself. Everyone is searching for Agatha and trying to find her as quickly as possible. But days later, the search is actually called off when her brother-in-law actually reports that he had received a letter from Agatha the day after her disappearance, saying that she was going to a spa in Yorkshire. However, police suspect that this note was fake, so they just reopen the case immediately and completely ignore it. A week later, police are getting nowhere, and they are getting hundreds of reported sightings of Agatha all over the UK, but none of their tips had actually led anywhere. There was an estimated of about 1,000 people who were helping the search, and this was also the first time that planes were involved in a search. So because of all this, police begin to resort to desperate measures. And I mean very desperate measures. First, they decide they're going to bring in one of Agatha's dogs to the scene of the crime at the car, and they're going to see if the dogs can track down the scent and see if the dogs somehow know where they went. Obviously, this didn't work. The dogs just sit there and whine, and it gets them nowhere. Are we surprised? No. But somehow their strategies get weirder. They decide to also start looking through her manuscripts, which actually isn't the craziest idea, at least compared to the dog idea, just because Agatha was known for mysteries, so maybe she was acting out one of her own mysteries. I don't know. But they decided to bring in authors Conan Doyle, who is the creator of the Sherlock Holmes series, and Dorothy L. Sawyer, who is known for the Lord Peter Wimsey series. And they decide they're going to use their expertise in terms of mystery crime cases and see if they could help find Agatha. Obviously, that didn't work either. The weirdest police strategy to ever been used, they decide they're going to hold a seance. No, I'm not joking. They actually decided they were going to hold a seance. They brought in mediums and spiritualists to around the scene of the crime and hold a seance with some of Agatha's belongings to see if they could figure out where Agatha have gone. I'm sure you're surprised to hear that it didn't work. So now people are theorizing that maybe Agatha has died by this point. Because the scene of the crime was near a natural spring that was known as the Silent Pool, 2 children were thought to have died there in the past. So journalists were now suggesting that it was possible that Agatha either accidentally or purposely had drowned herself in that body of water. However, there was no body, so it seemed very unlikely to police that she would have drowned. So because of how notable Agatha Christie is at the time, the news of her disappearance goes worldwide. On December 11th, the New York Times reports a break in the case, and that before Agatha left, she actually wrote 3 letters in total. She wrote one to her brother-in-law, who we already talked about in the beginning. She wrote one to her secretary, which basically only had details about scheduling. And the last one was to her husband. Now, police know about these letters. The secretary's letter doesn't contain any information. They know about the whole Yorkshire, that she said she was going to go to Yorkshire. But then they go to the husband and try to get his letter. And he begins to make himself look suspicious. And they begin to suspect foul play from Archie. And maybe she was killed, and maybe that's what they're supposed to be looking for. Because once they go to Archie and ask him about this letter, he tells authorities that he doesn't have it. He had already burned the letter because he says, quote, there were no informations about her whereabouts, unquote. So clearly people are starting to get suspicious of Archie. So now we have Bob Tappan, who is a banjo player at the Swan Hydra Hotel all the way in Harrogate, Yorkshire. Now on December 14th, Bob Tappan is doing his job as a banjo player, and he spots a woman dancing the Charleston, and he thinks that she looks very familiar. Well, Bob was actually right, and this was indeed Agatha Christie. This was the first time that Agatha Christie had been seen in 12 days. So now we know that the note from the brother-in-law was correct, and Agatha did actually end up at the spa in Yorkshire. And funny enough, the police never thought to actually go and check the spa in Yorkshire. You would think as a police that would be your first thing to do because that was their first real clue, but no. Nope. So Bob notifies police that he sees a woman who he suspects is Agatha Christie. So police and Archie go to the hotel, and Archie picks her up, and she just looks at him in what is described as a stony state. Agatha had completely suffered from memory loss, and she did not know who Archie was. According to biographer Andrew Norman, he predicts that Agatha was actually in a psychogenic trance, which described by Psychology Today is a state of dissociative amnesia. It usually happens when there's some sort of unexpected travel and the person just completely loses awareness of their identity, which usually follows a traumatic or stressful event, which again we can see from Agatha's case. So since Agatha was suffering from memory loss, she could not tell police what had happened. So it was up to police to try to piece it all together themselves. So what they came up with was Agatha left home and was traveling to London when she crashed her car en route, and she somehow got from her car to King's Cross station, where she boarded a train and got to Harrogate with no luggage. And then when she got to the Swan Hotel, she checks in under the name Teresa Neal. Now, if this name sounds familiar to you, it should. If we remember from before, Archie's mistress's name was Nancy Neal, and Agatha used her name to check in to the Swan Hotel. So while Agatha was there, she was actually living lavishly. She had not a care in the world. She was getting spa treatments, she was joining balls and going to dances. And once Archie actually got to the hotel to pick her up, it was said that she was in no hurry at all. She actually made him wait at the hotel lobby and then changed into an evening dress before even leaving the hotel. Honestly, as crazy as it sounds, it's kind of iconic. I gotta give it to her. So obviously, reporters and the media are covering this case because why wouldn't you? It is such a great story. And they decide to ask Archie, why would Agatha choose the name Neal? And Archie decides he's just gonna deflect. He says he has no idea who Neal is, no idea who Teresa Neal is, no idea who Nancy Neal is, and has no idea where she got this name up from. But funny enough, during her stay at the Swan Hotel, Agatha had actually placed ads in the newspaper under the name Teresa Neal in hopes that a relative would come forward and help her learn about her identity. So once Agatha goes back with Archie, they actually end up living two separate lives. She takes her daughter and they move to London, where Agatha begins her psychiatric treatment and gradually starts to regain her memory. In 1928, Agatha and Archie officially divorce, and Agatha finally completes the book The Mystery of the Blue Train, and then she decides to travel on the Orient Express, which then inspires her most famous novel, The Murder on the Orient Express. In 1930, she marries an archaeologist named Max Mallowan, and by this point, she's in a great state of mind, and she starts writing like a madwoman. She writes 2 to 3 books a year. Most people don't barely write one a year. Included in all these books, she actually does write a biography. But unfortunately, she doesn't write about her disappearance or her first marriage. So we don't really have in-depth knowledge of what actually happened during this time and what happened to her. So there actually are a few theories about what had actually happened to Agatha during this time. The first one being that this was all a publicity stunt. The same year that Agatha went missing was the same year that her book, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, was actually releasing. So people thought that she probably knew that if she went missing, she would be headline news and this would drive the sales of her new book. However, this is probably not the most reliable theory because her book was already doing pretty well at the time, and also Agatha Christie was known to be a very private person. Also apparently had stage fright. People don't think that she would pull a publicity stunt when she has stage fright. It just wouldn't make sense. So the next theory, and what I think is the most interesting theory, is pretty similar to the publicity stunt theory. And it's that Agatha had actually set up this whole thing in order to humiliate her husband. So the weekend of her disappearance, Agatha had actually knew that Archie was planning to go stay at Nancy's place over the weekend. And it just so happened that Nancy's house was only 6 miles away from where Agatha's car was found, which to me isn't that crazy. It could purely be coincidental, honestly. We don't even know if Agatha knew where Nancy lived. So this theory came from biographer Jared Cade, who came to this conclusion after he persuaded one of Agatha's friends and sister-in-laws, Nan Watts' daughter, Barbara, to go through some old family papers. And Barbara did find some papers, and they came to the conclusion that after the car crash, Agatha had abandoned her car, and she took a train to London where she stayed with Nan. And then once she was there, Nan gave her some money for her to go to Harrogate, and kind of stay there in hiding. I don't think this one is truly believable because Agatha was so private, and why would someone who's so private want to do something so public? And then the last theory comes from Agatha herself. Later on, Agatha actually decides to do an interview with the Daily Mail. This is the one and only time that Agatha had ever talked about what had happened during those 11 days. So, according to Agatha's now recollection of that time, she had suffered memory loss due to the car crash. It is known that Agatha had suffered from insomnia before the disappearance, but she had also suffered from bouts of despondency and depression. She said that she was having suicidal thoughts. We kind of already know this. We kind of can already know this to be true because, again, before all this happened, she had lost her mother and her husband was cheating on her at the same time. That, combined with her already existing mental illnesses, we can definitely see the mental trauma there. So when she was driving, she was actually planning to completely drive off that cliff and take her own life, then decided against it and came to a sudden stop. But when she did this, she hit her head on the steering wheel, and this also caused physical trauma along with her psychological trauma. So everything between the car crash and how she got to the hotel was kind of a blur for her because Agatha had basically completely dissociated with her real identity. But she said she actually felt nostalgia for that time because she didn't remember who she was. She was literally a completely new woman. She didn't have all the worries and the stress and the anxieties that she had while she was back at home. But even though Agatha was saying all this, people weren't completely buying it. How could Agatha see photos of herself and not put two and two together that was her? Well, what she said was that she obviously did see these newspapers. Everyone saw them. But she had believed this idea and had come to the conclusion that Agatha Christie had died by this point. Again, she did not believe she was Agatha Christie. In her head, she was Teresa Neal. So she just did not think they were the same person. She thought, Agatha Christie is obviously dead. I am not. So how could that be me? But she did acknowledge that she always had thought that she resembled Agatha, even apparently to the point of going around to employees around the hotel and asking them if they thought she looked like her too. It's funny to me that that no other employees really picked up on the fact that this was indeed Agatha Christie. They probably just all knew her as Teresa Neal and just didn't question it, I guess. But still, people weren't convinced, and they also brought up the idea of money. How is she able to afford to stay at the hotel? Which I don't think this is that far-fetched. Agatha said that she left the house with 60 pounds, which today is equivalent of 3,800 pounds, which doesn't seem that crazy to me. If you are leaving the house and you're not planning on coming back for a while, we don't really know how long she was planning on leaving, but if you're not planning on coming back for a while, you're probably most likely going to take money with you. And that seems like a more than a reasonable amount of money to stay at a hotel for about a week. So Agatha had passed away peacefully on January 12, 1976, at the age of 75. At the end of her life, she wrote 75 novels and a play and sold over 100 million copies. So what do you guys think? Do you believe Agatha and what she said? Do you think it was a publicity stunt? Do you think she was trying to humiliate your husband? Or do you think that she just suffered from memory loss? Personally, I am going to believe Agatha, just because in a lot of these cases we don't get to hear from the missing person. And since she gave her side, I'm just going to choose to believe that. And I don't think it's that far-fetched. Just based on what we know about psychology today, it is definitely possible for her to have suffered memory loss from a car accident, and she was going through a very traumatic time in her life. And it definitely isn't that far-fetched to believe that she would disassociate from herself. But we'll never truly know because we weren't there during those 11 days. So, Yeah, it's just really ironic that someone who constantly wrote about mysteries just happened to turn into a mystery herself. So that's all I have today for episode 2 of How Did We Get Here? And that was the story of the disappearance of beloved Agatha Christie. Luckily, this was a happy ending type of case. She was not harmed in the long run, and she did end up getting happily remarried. Her daughter was fine, everyone was fine. Archie did end up marrying Miss Nancy Neal, but But what do you think? Do you believe Agatha? Do you believe this was a publicity stunt? Do you think that she was trying to humiliate her husband? Or do you think that she just suffered from memory loss? Well, I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for listening to How Did We Get Here? And be sure to tune in next week